All right. Hi, everyone. I am joining you to talk about the third installment of Sermon on the Mount series. Today, we're going to be talking about Matthew 5:31 to 48. Um, so, as always, follow up on last week's challenge. It's always helpful if you yourself do the challenge. Um, Last week, we looked at the first two examples of kind of righteousness at work, and that was in anger and lust. It's not just murder, it's anger. It's not just adultery, it's lust. And today, Jesus is going to talk about four more examples. Of course, there's not just six examples, but these are the six that he gives here. And they're very telling ones, as you saw last week. He dives right into the heart of it. So, first, we're going to dive into divorce, which is a really tough topic. He only gives two verses to it here. So I'm going to have you kind of get his point, and then we're going to go over to Matthew 19, where Jesus talks more in depth about divorce. So in Matthew 19, Jesus teaches us more about what he's saying in Matthew 5, and what he's getting at here is highly debated. Okay, so as you ask this question, people are going to have different views. And what I'm saying in my note to you is that people's experience is going to color how they read this, just the way that it is. I don't know how important it is to challenge people too much on this. I think the larger point is to get people to understand the point of marriage and God's desire for marriage. Okay. So just be really, there's some pastoral care needed here on your part of just recognizing that people read this through a lens of hurt sometimes as they think about their parents' marriage, and how that's maybe impacted them. But what I'm reading here is Moses, the law of Moses. If you go back and read them, the reference is slipping me right now. I'm sure I'll think of it later. But Moses was talking about a certificate of divorce. If you divorce, what are the means of getting a certificate of divorce? And Jesus is saying, actually, I don't want you to divorce. And he says both in Matthew 5 and Matthew 19, except on the ground of sexual immorality. And what he's getting at here is that the purpose of marriage, which you see in verses 4 to 6, goes back to creation. That God intended marriage to be the husband and the wife leave their mother and father, and there's this union of flesh. And you see this in weddings. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Okay, so that's I'm kind of walking through the first couple of questions here. That's his teaching. The basis of his teaching is Genesis. The nature of marriage is this union. You're coming together. You're becoming one. Okay, and Moses gave, there it is, Deuteronomy 24. I knew it was in there. Moses gave an allowance for divorce. If you want to read that, you can. But this, as he says down in verse 8, is because of your hardness of heart. And this is going to be a theme that you're going to see a lot in this chapter if you really dive into it, is that a lot of what happened in the law was almost kind of like recognizing, okay, there's a lot of brokenness here. How should we deal with the brokenness? Okay, like it's not God's intention that people divorce, but what do we do when they do divorce, or when they do decide to remarry? How should we deal with that, even if that's not God's design? So this is a little bit tricky to understand, but hopefully that makes sense, because Jesus is saying here, like, look, God through Moses is kind of working with a broken world here, but I'm telling you that divorce and remarriage are not God's design. Okay, now this greatly differs, of course, from modern teaching. I skipped over something. I think the take home for us, we're not married. Well, you guys aren't. I'm married. I don't think you're married, but I am. But as you prepare for marriage, it should shape the way you prepare for marriage, because people change over time. Things happen. And we're not really signing up for you complete me or whatever. You're signing up for, I'm going to love you and serve you and point you to Christ. That is my commitment to you. Think about Hosea. God tells Hosea to marry a prostitute or a promiscuous woman. And that kind of talks about what his relationship is like with us. He is married to us through the covenant of the Spirit, and we prostitute ourselves out to idols. And if marriage is meant to be a picture of how God loves us, the picture really is almost, it doesn't even matter what happens in marriage. We are called to stand together. Now, be careful with things like abuse. And of course, there's some room here for sexual immorality, but I still think that the number one design for marriage is to stay together no matter what. That is the point. That should shape the way you enter into and prepare for marriage, and even think about your relationships now, what they mean about you. So I have some questions there. I spent a long time on that because it's a tough topic. Let me know if you have any questions there. I'm happy to talk about them. The next section has to do with oaths. Let me get back to Matthew 5 here. So the next section has to do with oaths in 33 to 37. So you heard it said, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. And Jesus is saying, actually, it would be better if you don't swear at all. That would be better. Now note here that there's some confusing language, and there's like, don't swear on, what is it, by heaven or by the throne of God, and you're like, what? It's this idea of you're giving credence to your words based on something higher than you. It's the same idea as when you say like, I swear to God or something like that. Now, that is kind of a profane statement because you're pulling God into something that he's not necessarily claiming, right? You're using the Lord's name in vain. You're putting something on him that's not his. You're using God for your purposes. But what this reveals, so I'm kind of walking through the questions, what this reveals about our brokenness is that there's this an inherent tendency to need to prove ourselves because of just the disbelief and the lies that encircle us. Like, I did this, I swear, I did it. Well, why do I need to say that I swear? Am I not trustworthy? Or have I lied before? Maybe just there's an inherent distrust in the world, even in people that we feel trust us most. Maybe to Chelsea, I would say, like, no, I did this. I swear I did it. Like, please believe. We kind of get into this idea, but it just reveals the brokenness of the human condition, and that's kind of why Jesus is opposed to oaths. He wants us to get into this mindset of complete truthfulness, and the reason that I think that that's it shouldn't be necessary for believers because we are truthful people, and it's important for us to be truthful because if we're not truthful in all things, there's reason to doubt all that we say. Now, this is challenging. It's challenging to be truthful all the time. I know it sounds easy to be truthful, but I'd like you to think about why maybe this is difficult to practice, and maybe how we can step into complete truthfulness in all that we do. Maybe we hedge the way that we speak when we talk to other people about our faith or our lives. So just think about that a little bit, but it's an interesting little section for him to include. The next section has to do with an eye for an eye. And what Jesus is going to say is, I'm not just asking you to not retaliate against people. I'm asking you to not resist, to forsake even something that might be your legal right. Like when in the passages tells you to go an extra mile, when someone asks you to go a mile, go an extra mile. Legally, Roman centurions could ask you to go a mile with them and carry their stuff, which must have been so annoying. And he's saying it's your legal right to not have to go another mile, but go another mile. Okay, so this section, the next section is about loving your enemies. This section doesn't necessarily have to do with enemies per se, but someone slapping you is not great. So it does have a little bit to do with enemies. But what this section is saying is it's not just don't resist. It is an active seeking of the interest of others. What we see is that when the Holy Spirit gets hold of us and the character of Christ starts to bubble up within us, we're going to start being self-giving, like in Philippians 2, that I point there. The Spirit is always given for the greater good. That's what spiritual gifts are given for, is for the other, not for yourself, not for building up yourself. And so as we walk in the Spirit, it's not just that we don't retaliate. It's like, oh, you slap me, I'm cool. It's offering more. And I think that what this does, it does a few things. It shows Christ to people. Think about how wild it is when you're trying to like kind of take advantage of someone for your own good, and they were to say like, please take advantage of me more. I'm seeking out your interest. Man, that is a convicting, tangible way to show Christ to people. It should kind of cause people to wake up and say like, whoa, like, what is this? What are you doing? um, you know, it's a way of loving them and kind of showing them what's going on, awakening them to their own selfishness, their own self-centeredness. I just blew through some of these questions, but I hope that helps understand this section. Our desire to retaliate really shows our own selfishness and how much we're wrapped up in our own sense of pride and being honored. Some of that is good. I mean, I don't want people to slap you, but at the end of the day, what's more important is that the slappers come to know Christ. That's definitely quotable, the slappers. But anyway, there you go. So yeah, that's that. The final section is loving your enemies. Now, what's interesting here is that Leviticus 19:18 is being kind of quoted. The second half is added on. And what a lot of people think is that Jesus is addressing what has become common. So the law says love your neighbor. And the corollary that comes up in our minds is and hate your enemy, right? Now, I know that we don't say that, but our hearts say that, right? Like when we are called to love someone, the kind of the corollary of love is hate, the flip side of it. And so our hearts very naturally sometimes are resentful towards those people that we deem to be our enemies. Now, a question from a book that I got here, did Jesus choose his enemies? It's an interesting thought. And in light of this, how do you define an enemy? I think an enemy is anyone who takes issue with you, anyone who doesn't hates you for righteousness. Now, this isn't like if you're the slapper and you slap someone, okay, well, you've created your enemy. But the point here is that Jesus created enemies through righteousness. So you'll see over time, like it's good to suffer for righteousness' sake. Don't suffer for evil, suffer for righteousness' sake. And then your enemies kind of come to you. You're not choosing enemies. So we can follow Jesus' example in making enemies. And I love that in verse 45, there's this idea of like, God blesses both the evil and the righteous in this earth. And sometimes that's very frustrating to us. We say, like, why do the wicked prosper? But what you'll see is that God gives even the wicked what they need in his grace in pursuit of them. And so we should do the same thing. God loved us while we were enemies. How did he love us? Many ways, but especially through the cross. So we should treat our enemies the same way. That's what it looks like to live out love. Love is not just a feeling. We're probably not going to feel loving towards our enemies, but we can love them through our actions. Now this closes with verse 48, which is super challenging. Like, be perfect. Okay, great. But the idea here is that we are pursuing the very character of God as we pursue. I think that verse 48 is a summary of the whole chapter, not just a section. Although this section, loving your enemies, might be the hardest one. Maybe lust, I don't know. But I think what we can say is that when we're pursuing perfection, this is an idea of like, I just want to be perfect. It's this idea of I want to know God by living in the way that honors God. As you come to know what he is like and then actually experiencing that deep knowledge that the Bible talks about, that personal knowledge. So I have some closing thoughts, reflecting on which one of the 6 areas you want to grow in the most. And I have some conclusions, one for each one. So hopefully you guys can walk in those this week. So I think that's all. There's a lot to talk about here. Let me know if you got any questions. Talk to you soon.